What I'm going to start out with here is a little bit about DStretch. And this is something called decorrelation stretch, and it works with rock paintings. And it was actually developed for the Mars rover, and it was used on the Mars rover originally, and then they let it go free to the public. And a guy in California, who you see here on this side here, this guy here, John Harmon, was a rock art researcher. He was also a medical technology guy who did imaging with medical technology. So he put this DStretch onto a camera, or put it into a way that you could use it and look at rock paintings and enhance and see the rock painting better through the DStretch. And the first thing he did was there were about 3 different models of Canon cameras that he was able to take apart and put a chip into, so that you could then take a picture with it, and then you could press a button and it would go through a series of iterations, and you would see different color channels with how it would operate. And shortly after he did that, some guy in California bought up all of these cameras that he could off the internet. They were all kind of used cameras, and he started putting the chips in himself and selling them for $100, and John was doing this thing for free. And so that ticked him off, so he put it on a cell phone. So you now have it available to you. Everyone has it available, but you pay him $30 to get the DStretch to put onto your cell phone, or however you're going to operate with the whole thing. So now you've heard enough about this, so what does it do? Do you all see the painting there? You see the rock painting? Barely, don't you? You sort of see the rock painting? Here's what you see with DStretch. Pretty wild, isn't it? Pretty crazy to be able to see something that well when you couldn't see it before, when you have DStretch. So here, in fact, we are at Valley of the Shields. Do you see a painting in that? So that, in effect, here's what's there on the wall. So in effect, what this is requiring us to do is to return to sites and walk down the walls next to the sites, and it seems to work extremely well in these Cretaceous age sandstones that we have here. And so you walk along, you just take pictures of the wall, and then look in your camera. If you have one of these ones that works in the field like we do, you just walk along or use your phone, take it, and then you click through these spectrums and you see this kind of stuff on the picture. It doesn't work with petroglyphs most of the time. Occasionally it will, so that you'll see with an incised petroglyph. This is also at Valley of the Shields, and you'll see here there's an incised figure there. It's kind of hard to see, but when you see it in DStretch, it brings it out quite a bit more. So if you have quite a bit of red iron in the rock itself, sometimes it will work with petroglyphs, but most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time it only works with paintings. But it has required us to return to all of these sites so that we can see what we've discovered at a site. I'm going to talk to you today quite a bit about the shield-bearing warrior motif. This is the most commonly recognized rock art motif there is in Montana and Wyoming. And it's essentially a big shield that's over the body of a warrior behind the shield. And you see they're made by incising into the rock surface. They're made in multiple colors of paint. They're made by pecking out the surface of the rock around it. They can be little tiny. Look at this guy's less than a centimeter tall over here, so they can be little tiny things. They can be big round things. They can have multiple colors. Here's one with a gun, for example. So, we have all of these, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about shield-bearing warriors today, so I'm introducing you to this particular kind of image. This one's also at Valley of the Shields, but just to show you the difference in the sizes that they are, this one is 2 meters tall. Here he is in DStretch, so that you see it comes out better. This one you see pretty well without DStretch. Lots of times you still do, but we see more detail with the DStretch. And that becomes important because we use that to do the drawings. We're trying to get finished drawings of what we're doing. So here's the most important point about these shield-bearing warriors. This point is that you can use a bow and arrow, you can use a spear, you can use a gun, you can use all of these things for hunting. But a shield you can only use for protection in war. So that when we see these shield-bearing warriors, we know they represent warfare. They represent people fighting with each other. Because there's no other reason someone would have a big shield like that, a big rawhide shield which is 39 inches across, covering your whole body, and carry that around with you if you were going on a hunting expedition. So it's important that when we see these things, we recognize that people are fighting with each other when we find these kinds of things. I'm going to start with a site down here called Owl Canyon, and it's south of Rygate. It's pretty well known. It's best known for this picture that's on the ceiling here, and this is one you certainly don't need DStretch to see. You can see it's an absolutely beautiful figure done in red paint, really spectacular. It's probably 700 years old or so. We don't have a date on this, a real date. You'll see in a few minutes we can date this paint, and I'll show you some of the dates that we have. But we don't have a date on this one. It has an interesting face in the center of it, so that it's got and we don't know precisely what this. We have other shields that do have faces on them, but this one is unusual in as much as it has this face. We've been going to this site since the 1960s, and Lauren Haar, who was here two weeks ago when I was here, Lauren Haar actually went with the landowner to this site, and the landowner said to him, I sort of remember there being something else at this site, and so go over to this piece of rock over here, and you'll see it's very difficult to see but a little bit of bits of paint in there, and this is what you see when you use DStretch. So that we're able to see that we have this whole group of warriors that are there that are associated with that other big guy. So we got the war leader there associated with all of the other guys that are going off into the war with him. So here's another iteration of DStretch, and that allows us to do a drawing like this. So that's what we're after. We're after these drawings of all these sites, trying to preserve as much as we can before we're lost in the opportunity to be able to get this kind of stuff out of these sorts of sites with the kind of stuff that I work with. So in any case, these are these marching warriors, and we have these in scenes, various places, kind of phalanxes of warriors. And you'll see here's another example of these marching warriors. And in this particular case, so there's sort of a mass of warriors. So it's probably a location where they massed up together and then went out, marched out to war. And we have accounts actually from David Thompson, the geographer, explorer in Canada for a long time, in the late 1700s actually. He actually went out and talked about this battle that a Blackfoot Indian, actually he was a Cree Indian, he was captured when he was a child and raised by the Blackfoot, named Sakumapi. And Sakumapi went out on this battle, and he said that when we went to the battle, this is all pre-horse, so before the horses, and he went out and he said, we lined up our shields on one side, and then the enemy, who were the Snake in this case, which is probably the Shoshone, the enemy lined up theirs on the other side, and we shot arrows at each other throughout the whole day. And a couple people were wounded, but no one was killed. And when it came dark, we went home. That was the end of the fight. But they actually would at sometimes engage the fight to where they would attack the other line. So the two sides would attack each other. And these guys would carry, you'll see in a few minutes some examples of them, they would carry something like a pike or a rake or something like that so that they could pull down the shield of the other side, and then they'd have a person, they'd be two people behind a shield, and one guy'd have his bow, and the other guy'd reach out with his pike or his rake and pull down the shield, and the other guy'd shoot his bow at the guy on the other side once it was down, so they would get into hand-to-hand combat. So it wasn't all kind of nice, go out and have a nice little day in the field shooting at each other and not get anybody really hurt. It was also meant to kill people at times with this kind of warfare. So in any case, now we're going to talk about another site, Bear Gulch, which is very close to town here, and you know about it. And it's best known for the fact that it has over 1,000 of these shield-bearing warriors at it. Bear Gulch and Atherton Canyon, a site that's quite close to it, have over 1,000 of these shield-bearing warriors that have been recorded at this site. And here's a photograph, and here's DStretch of that, so that you can see the details that come out. You get much better detail. Or here's another iteration of DStretch. And again, the intent is that we do that because we want to do drawings. And in this case, they did do drawings of all of these panels that are at this site. And here, for example, is one where the DStretch did bring out details in the incised work. See the legs of the shield bearer here? See here? There's the shield bearer incised on top of this shield bearer up here. The interesting thing about this site is, this Bear Gulch thing, is that they have been making at Bear Gulch, they have been making these shield-bearing warrior figures for several hundred years. Some people think even 500 years. And curiously enough, you got 1,000 of them there between Atherton Canyon, which is about 10 miles from Bear Gulch. You got 1,000 of them, and they're made in a very particular style. They use half of the body, half the time with red on it. They put certain kinds of bustles on the backside. They have little fox head, wolf head type headdresses, etc. And they're very recognizable. It's a style called the Bear Gulch style now, and it's very, very recognizable. And in all the time after the site has been recorded and before, that's the only place we've ever found them, was at Bear Gulch and Atherton Canyon. So here there are 1,000 of them there, and that isn't people that are living there all year. That's got to be people who are coming from somewhere else, and almost certainly to hunt buffalo, and they're setting up and staying there for some length of time at Bear Gulch, and then they leave at the end of the year, and they've been doing that for 500 years. They've been coming back to that same location, up to as much as 500 years coming back, leaving those shields. And we're always really fascinated in why only there do they have these shields. The only place that you find these shield figures like this. And then Lauren tells me about this other site called Water Skipper site down here. That's also south of Rygate, quite close to Owl Canyon. And this is a new site that nobody had seen before. And he takes me out there and takes me up to this site here. And here you'll see we found some of the, this figure is from Bear Gulch. You see that bustle on the back like these up here. So this is the first time that we had found these Bear Gulch style figures not at Bear Gulch and Atherton Canyon, this distance away, which becomes pretty interesting. I mean, it's only 80, 90 miles from the Bear Gulch, but at the same time, we had never found them before. Now we did find them in a different location, so that's what's of interest to the whole thing. What's interesting is that if this would represent one side in this battle, is it against these guys on the other side in this battle? And we can't answer that, of course. We can't say that's what's happening, but we can, in fact, because these two sites are so close together, we can certainly speculate that that's the thing that's happening, that these people who had the Bear Canyon type style figures were in fact fighting with the people who had these fancy type figures like these here at the site. But we don't know that for sure. So, interestingly enough, this is the book that's written on Bear Gulch called Fraternity of War by James Kaiser and some others. And I want to talk to you now about something called vertical series. So you see these figures down here at the bottom. You have a whole bunch of H's that are on top of each other. Or you'll have a whole bunch of little dots on two sides of a line. They're considered to be, in his estimates, back at least at the end of the late Archaic, or in other words, before the late prehistoric period, so at least, like 2,000 years old to where these things are made. That's what he suggests. Here are the Bear Gulch type figures that you see up in here with that 500 years that they were made up in through here. But back here is these ones that have these H's and so on, these vertical series type thing. And it's been written about. We found this at enough sites now where you have the same symbol on top of each other running up the side of the wall that we are now calling it the vertical series type rock art, and we have about 30 sites where we found this now across this part of the world. And I was at Ekalaka, Montana, and I went in to see a guy named Frank Mailing, who had a collection, and he had a pipe in his collection. You'll see this pipe, and I immediately noticed that if you look at the pipe, it had vertical series on it. It had the same image on top of the other. So that interested me because we tested the pipe and discovered it had been smoked. So it had been used for tobacco, so it was actually a smoking pipe, not a sucking tube then. In other words, it had been used for smoke. And so I said, well, I should write an article on that because that might associate vertical series with tobacco some way or another. And so I discovered, looking in the literature, that another pipe had been found, another tubular pipe just like this, and it also had a vertical series on it. So I took the combination of the two. I mean, both of these pipes had this sort of W on it, and then here's that list of ones that Linnea Sundstrom had put together, and you discovered these things are repeated so that they're on top of this repetitive type design, this like a T with a dot on one side and W type design, and it's the ones that are found also at other rock art sites. So the question becomes, could we find more of those? So we go to a site which is to the west of Molt, Montana, and we go along, and there are 2 or 3 localities there at that site, and I'll show you some from one side. Here's the wall here, here's the DStretch of the wall, and you'll see we have a whole bunch of little M's set on top of each other. Isn't that interesting? I mean, if you think about it, who's putting these things where you have the same little symbol stacked up on top of each other? And interestingly enough, at this site, you've got a tobacco type image. So in fact then, what we're suggesting at this site is that this could be associated with tobacco. Here's the DStretch, again, another DStretch of it so that you see that figure. And then you'll see the drawing we're able to make. And there's this curious thing down here at the bottom. And if you look at it in DStretch, you can see it looks like some sort of a skin or a bag or something like that, even kind of tied on the end here. And we think that's probably an otter skin bag, which was used extensively in the Crow tobacco ceremonials. And so we think it could clearly be associated with the Crow tribe. And so here's another panel at that site, and you can see, you can't see much till you see it in DStretch. And you can see in DStretch it's quite a bit of confusion, but again, that's what we do. We walk in, now we start working with the camera to get in closer and try to figure out what's going on in that particular picture that you're seeing there. And you can almost see him, see that buffalo there? Here, I'll show him to you a little better. Here's his mouth, here's his head, here's his back leg back here. So you're seeing a buffalo on the wall. Here, I'll make it a little bit better for you. There, now you see the buffalo a little bit better. Got all the superimposition. What we do is we come in and we use these charts like this to be able to figure out what's on the bottom and what's on the top. And you can see the oldest thing here is the bison, and then you have these other things added in like spears, and the vertical series are up at the top of this, so that if we look at the buffalo now, you see him pretty good, don't you? At the bottom there, you see his mouth, his eye, his mouth, his hump, his back leg. He's got arrows stuck into him from the side. Those arrows were added at a later period of time. And then we have these DStretch, or these vertical series figures that are over the top of them. And you got a whole bunch of them. You got 3 over here, little round circles. You got the T with the 2 dots on each side. You got this little sort of track-like thing that goes up the wall. You got pluses over here. I mean, how this relates to it, we don't know. But in any case, you got these vertical series that you find up the wall. And we don't know what those are. But they're pretty interesting, aren't they? And of course, what I'm showing you is that they suggest that they're archaic in age, so they're 2,000 years old. The ones I'm talking about are up here. They're in the Crow period of time when they're here. So these things have been made now for the last 2,000 years at least, we think. they're making these vertical series type things at sites around here, and we're learning a lot more about them from DStretch, from using a DStretch at these sites. We don't know what they are. This is called the Chippewa song stick, and you'll see we have the very upper drawn out here, but you have all these various symbols up the side. And this was used by the Chippewa Ojibwa to hold, and then the person would sing a song, and he would use these little things as a demonic device as he ran his thumb down the thing, so that he would talk about, as he went down, he'd sing certain things about certain things that he saw, so it was just reminding him what the next verse of the song was going to be as he went along. But the ones we have are all the same symbol going up the thing, so it doesn't make sense that that's what it is. It doesn't represent one of these Chippewa song sticks. Or here's what's called a prescription stick. And there aren't too many of these left in museums, but they were fairly common. You'll see, but again, this one is something that a medicine person used to dose out various dosages of various plants and so on, and tell somebody what they needed and so on. But again, they differ. Each little symbol differs from the other one, so that it isn't like this vertical series. So we don't know, but it's one of the curious things that we're interested in. There's going to be actually a symposium at an upcoming Plains conference on vertical series rock art, just to try to sort it out, because there are a number of sites in Canada and down all the way across Montana into Wyoming with these vertical series things. So now I taught you about vertical series. I'm going to take you to a site now over south of Great Falls, over to this Painted Coulee site. And you'll see at this site, this little canyon. It's on private land, and we were fortunate enough to work with the landowners, and they wanted us to come out and work at the site. And you'll see we had a whole series of panels along this wall right here, and the one that we were most interested in were these that had these figures in them. And this one in particular, when we used DStretch associated with it, you'll see that we can get the figure to kind of come out better in DStretch. And you'll see that when we use the DStretch, that he's got a bow in his hand, and he's wearing snowshoes on his feet. And this is a Catlin painting, George Catlin painting of Indians hunting buffalo with snowshoes on their feet. And that was quite popular, in fact. That drawing of with snowshoes was quite popular. More than one artist did that because it was so unique that the Indians could wear snowshoes and use bows and arrows and chase down buffalo in the drifts of snow and then kill them by walking up beside them or using dogs to chase them. And they even had the Ojibwa even had a dance related to snowshoes because it was related to hunting with snowshoes. So it's a fairly unique thing that's happening. So we went to the site and were able to take a very small sample of paint. It's so small, it's about the size of a pinhead. It's a very tiny amount of paint. And of course, we're doing this with landowner permission at this site to be able to take that little bit of paint out of one of the area. This was already in the bottom of right here where you see the finger is, that was already eroding paint. And so the little tiny bit of that paint we took from there, and we came out with a date of 1710 years ago, or essentially AD 300. And if you know anything about archaeology in this part of the world, you will know that that's very, very old for a bow and arrow. So here's this figure that's got a bow and arrow, and it's almost the very time that bow and arrow was introduced to this part of the world. We think by Avonlea hunters who brought the bow and arrow in at about AD 300, or exactly when our date was at this site. So that's of interest to us because those people apparently wore snowshoes when they came in, and they were certainly outsiders when they came with the bow and arrow, so they were people coming in from the outside. Also at this site, a little ways down from it, there's a shield-bearing warrior. So you see this shield-bearing warrior here. He's got this shield around him, and he's got a couple of darts stuck off on the side. And Jim Kaiser, who had written this site up at some period of time in the past, he suggested that this site was using an atlatl, so pre-bow and arrow. And he said that he was hunting, this was a deer or something that he was hunting. And all of us who are in this business were worried right away by the fact that, what do you mean you don't go hunting with a big shield? Remember, shields are used for warfare, so why would you go hunting with a big shield? And so why has the guy got a shield when he's out there? And so, in fact, one of the things that we did sort of accept is that people who used atlatls do carry extra darts, so that you see these are different scenes from around North America, and they do have those extra darts. So that worked in the favor of it being an atlatl that he had in his hand, but we couldn't really see the atlatl very well. So when we asked why use it on a hunting expedition, when we use DStretch, we see the figure is not a deer at all, but it's another human being. And he's been shot in the back with an arrow, and he's got a bow in his hand right here. So that in effect, what's happening is we also came in and took a sample of this, a little tiny sample, and here you see me holding an umbrella up over the top of it over here. So that, and that's because the sample is so small that there was some wind blowing that day, and the sample would blow off of her when the wind came. So I was holding that to cut the wind down for her to be able to take that sample. And we got the radiocarbon date, and in fact, it came back 8300, exactly the same time as our guy with the bow and arrow. So in effect, essentially this is a very old shield-bearing warrior. It's the oldest we've ever found at 8300. And so in effect, what you have then is you have the scene, and the landowner had found these projectile points on the land. They're called Pelican Lake projectile points. They fit nicely with this AD 300 level, and if that guy's using an atlatl, they would fit perfectly with it being on the atlatl. So we have the guy using the atlatl, and so we have, in a sense, the idea that you had the extra darts, you have the radiocarbon age, you have the Pelican Lake type projectile points. We think the guy does have an atlatl, and he is using an atlatl. And in effect, he's now in the process of getting into a fight with these people. It gives strong support for the fact that the Pelican Lake people were the ones who did this. So interestingly enough, what we sort of put together here is a battle between the resident Pelican Lake people and the nomadic bow and arrow users. And the resident Pelican Lake people won the battle, is what the story is telling us here, because they put an arrow in the back of the guy with the bow. So that the introduction of the bow and arrow wasn't all fun and games. You know, it wasn't all, thank you very much for bringing me the bow. If here I am with my atlatl, et cetera, fighting to protect myself and my whatever I have in my location, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of an interesting story. And now let me talk a little bit about the twins. So I'm going to talk about the twins, and this is a story that's well known across all of the Great Plains. And it's essentially, father goes hunting his pregnant wife. He tells her to beware of a stranger. And the stranger does come and kills mother, and then cuts out the twins. And he throws one twin into the teepee behind the lining and one into the spring. And then father comes home and discovers the one thrown in the teepee or behind the lodge curtain or whatever. And then ultimately they find the one living in the spring, and he's been wild, and they have to tame him, and he's got sharp teeth and all these things. And then father tells the two boys they find the spring boy, and they go about and they set out, and the two twins then set out to save the world. And the twins go around and they kill all the various monsters. They kill the sucking monster. They kill the giant beaver with a flint tail. And they have the long arm, one of the most important ones. He lives up in the sky, long arm does. And so the twins take him on and so on. So we go from that with these. They're all over the place. These are all different plains tribes and prairie tribes that had the twin hero story that I just told in one form or another. And you'll see the Hidatsa and the crow are up there, and that's really what we're focused on in this right here today. And then you come to this, which is a pretty famous crow shield. And this was actually collected from, it's called Sorbelly Shield, or Rotten Belly Shield, and it was collected by William Wilshute in the 1930s, 1920s or 30s from Mrs. Bulltongue in Pryor. She had it after her husbands and other relatives, all the relatives that would have used the shield had died. And so when Wilshute asked her, what is that on the shield? What does that mean? And she said, it's the moon. And so people like Robert Lowy, the famous person who worked with the Crow tribe, said it didn't make any sense. And other people couldn't understand. Even John Ewers at the Smithsonian in more recent time couldn't understand what she meant. It was the moon that was on that shield front. And it was actually Michael Cowdery, a guy who sort of studies Indian art, who figured it out. And essentially what it is, it's the moon. And here you see the constellation on the moon that is the head of this figure. Or some people see the whole figure in what's here on the constellation on the moon. So that you see the whole figure here, or you see the head, only the head is what they see in that constellation on the moon up here. Or not constellation, I mean the craters on the moon. I'm using the wrong word. So craters on the moon are what make this thing that look like this. So in effect, it is the moon. So we now know then that this is one of the hero twins. This is either Spring Boy or Lodge Boy that's on this shield. That's the suggestion that we're now working with based on what Cowdery told us. So now let me introduce you to something called ledger art. And this is drawings that are done on paper. And so with these drawings that are done on paper, and they were done, and they're pretty famous. I'm sure some of you know about ledger art. There was a Hidatsa ledger book that was discovered called the Lion Boy Ledger. And when people look through that ledger book, it was only discovered about 30 years ago. It was in a collection of a Mexican artist, and Miguel Covarrubias, and it was in his library, and no one knew about it. And so when they discovered in it, it had these figures, and you'll see that it had these figures that are the twins. You'll see the twins running along. One of them's got the flint tail out of the beaver, so that we could now recognize the twins even better. You can see their headdresses, etc. In this ledger book, one of them was of long arm, and he has reached down, and you can see they reach back and cut off his hand, and they throw it up into the sky, and it becomes the crow hand star in the sky. And so I don't have a picture of that today, but now let's move to a site called the Wepler site, which is really down here again, south of Reigate. And you can see right down at the very bottom down there, and you'll see there's a little cliff there. It has since collapsed since it was originally photographed. And when you look at what's on that cliff, you find a spring boy on that cliff. And no one knew what it was really until we figured this thing out. You'll see the head, it's got the bow, it's got the feathers. He's a spring boy that's on this cliff. And so that's what's fascinating about the whole thing is, and we had not recognized that figure at all until we got these ledger book things, and until Cowdery put together the fact that Rotten Belly Shield had one of these figures on it. And so we figure out that this is one of these spring boys. Well, then what happens is we start finding them all over the place. We start finding these spring boy figures that we knew nothing about previous to this. So that you've got these figures then that are, this is not far south of Lewistown. Here's one here that's pecked into the rock. It's kind of hard to see, but they always have these big ears. And sometimes they have that breastwork on the front, coming down the front of them. This one's west of Reigate. And then we find just the heads of these things too that we find now. Sometimes they have those teeth in them. That's from Spring Boy because his teeth weren't correct because he was eating fish all the time when he lived in the spring, etc. So, and then we find the one, this is at the Wepler site again. There's one there, we just have recently gotten this photograph of it. Someone found it had been taken because this whole site has collapsed. and they're apparently associated with horses some way or another. We had no notion of that. None of the tales about spring boy and lodge boy say anything about horses. But here's another. This is an incised one, which is just east of Reigate. And you'll see it's, again, here's a nice little spring boy, lodge boy type figure with the ears and the breastwork on his ribs or whatever showing. And it's associated with a horse. So we think that there must have been some sort of a tale with something to do with one of the lodge boy, spring boy tales had something to do with bringing horses or breaking horses or doing something like that in their association. So I introduced you to another figure there, the spring boy, lodge boy figure. So let's now move to another site, let's see down here, called the Fish Creek site. Again, I'm in the same little area down here south of Reigate. That's where we've been concentrating quite a bit. And here you'll see that here's a panel here. And you can see all the rock art on that panel. Can't you see all that rock art on that panel right there? Well, it has a bunch of handprints on it. So this whole series of handprints are found on that panel. And you'll see that here's another series of figures on that panel. And when we do the DStretch, we start to get these sort of bizarre looking figures that look like some sort of, I don't know, but you'll see here, here's a figure, these you can still see fairly well, but when we see them in DStretch, you'll see these dancing figures. And they're the most bizarre doggone things. I mean, Stuart Connor, Billings, Montana, one of the first people to record this site. It's on private land. Actually, the ranch house is within view of the site, so it gets protected pretty well because they don't like people going there. And in effect, you'll see all of the figures that are kind of dancing along. And Stu Connor talked about this. He went to, on the Hopi Reservation, he went to a dance, and he couldn't take any photographs, and he swore he saw these same dancing figures that day, and he came away and he wrote notes like crazy about what he'd seen and so on. So he always had a connection to the Hopi with what was going on with this. You'll see that it's a much larger panel. It goes out to this side, and when we use DStretch, we learn a whole bunch more. It's over on this side, including, in fact, a bison. You see the horns here, and you see there's another figure superimposed on them, but you see here's the body, and here's the horns and the head of a large bison that these figures are superimposed upon over on that side. So that's the second thing I've shown you, where you have figures, the vertical series, and now these things are on top of bison, which are older and in that particular setting. So that, in effect, here are then these dancing figures. And we don't know, I mean, these are Hopi Katsina figures. And Stu Connor had always wanted to know, and about 5 years ago now, I got asked to give a presentation on the Hopi Reservation at the Business Council. And so at the end, I asked them if I could show them a picture of this site and ask them if they knew anything about these figures or had any idea about them. And so they looked at it and very thoughtfully went back and forth. And I said, do you have any ideas? And they said, we'll take that under advisement. So they didn't tell me anything. So I got no answer as to whether or not they thought that there was any association with them. I think there's also a possibility that they could be associated with something out of the Northwest Coast. So these are off the Hopi Reservation from down there. These are stuff on the Northwest Coast. And there could have been then something in a face or a mask or something like that was made from the Northwest Coast. But the question, the big question becomes then, if you look at all of these tribes that I'm talking about, the Hidatsa and the Spring Lodge Boys, the Assiniboine, possibly the fighters in one of those battles back and forth. We got different tribes coming from the west. Maybe we got all the way from down here. We got the Crow talking back and forth. All of them centraling on this area. And what is it? What's there? What's in that area that they want? What's in the middle of that? All these tribes fighting with each other, all these shield figures, all the stuff going on in that area. What is it that they want in that area? Bison. They're all there to fight over bison. And here I am at American Prairie talking about bison. And bison become the focus of what these tribes are after. All of them are after these bison. And no tribe ever controlled that country. That was always sort of taken back by all the different tribes coming in from the outside. The Blackfoot and the Crow tried, but the Musselshell River was the dividing line between them. They fought back and forth from the north, the Blackfoot coming down to the Crow coming up from the south, and those bison are what they were all after. The tribes west of the, when they got pushed west of the Rocky Mountains, the Salish, the very Salish-speaking, the Flathead, the Pend Oreille, those tribes, they came back annually over the top of the mountains to get bison, came back over to this area. When William Hornaday in 1886 came to find the last bison, he's a taxidermist at the Smithsonian Institution, he discovers that they don't have any good bison hides to be able to make a bison statue or a stuffed bison for them. So he comes out here to get bison. He actually makes 2 trips out here. And where does he go? He goes right here, right in this area, right up in this center area to get the bison. The last bison in the United States are in this area. So that's it. Thank you very much. I'll answer questions for you, all right? So.